Welcome, everyone. My name's Hallie. I'm a member of the Quad Education team. Thank you for joining us today as we talk about the insider scoop on how admissions are decided. I know it's a hot topic, especially now. For those of you who are about to submit your applications, have submitted them, or are going to within the next few months. We have two fantastic admissions consultants here with us today who work with Quad and students and families through the entire application process, and they'll walk us through this topic. They have worked on the other side as well at universities, helping this process on the other side, and can really give some good insight into things to pay attention to. They'll talk about some myths and how to put your best foot forward as you submit your applications. And we'll have them introduce themselves in just a second. For those of you that don't know, Quad Education is an admissions consulting company, and we help students and families through the entire college application process, starting from candidacy building, so choosing your high school classes and extracurriculars, all the way through taking the SAT and ACT, writing your personal statement, putting together your application, all the way through the day you decide which school you will attend that you got into. And with that, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So we'll have our consultants introduce themselves, and then we'll talk about what the admissions process contains, give you a good understanding of how it's formatted. We'll talk about what admissions committees are looking for. We'll talk about the elements of your application that carry the most weight, and we'll go over some strategies to help you stand out. After that, we'll open things up for a Q&A. So if you have any questions through this, pop those in the chat Q&A box, and we'll get to those at the end. We are also recording this webinar, and we'll be sending it out in the next couple of days so you can look back on what we covered and catch anything that you may have missed. All right, so we have Darryl and Dr. Nick with us today. Darryl, can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Excellent. Yes, I will. Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Darryl Tiggle, and really excited to talk with you all this evening. I've actually worked for, I guess, closing in, I may have eclipsed 30 years worth of college admissions and college counseling experience, and worked both at my alma mater, Union College in Schenectady, New York, and then at Tufts University for a long time. And then I moved on to the other side of the college counseling admissions desk and worked as a high school college counselor for a long time. So really have great insights and experience from both sides of the desk. And I'm especially excited about talking about the topic that we're going to cover tonight, because I think this is what it's all about, isn't it, Nick?
Yeah, absolutely. Greetings, everyone. My name is Dr. Nick J. Acrocco. I've been with Quad for about 3 years, and very similar to Darryl, I worked in admissions at Vanderbilt University, my alma mater, and also in University of Pennsylvania within the Ivy League. I also worked in several high school communities. So Darryl and myself have been through this process tons of times, not only when we went to college, but also with all the students with whom we work with. So we're going to give you a lot of inside information as to how admissions works, but also some things that people may have misconceptions about. And what I think the biggest thing that I'd like each of you to take away from what we talk about is that they really are giving you full and fair consideration. It's not a trick. They're not trying to say no. They're not trying to be mean or anything like that. We're going to show you that's quite the opposite, and some tips and then tricks that you can do as you're applying to these colleges to have the best application going forward.
Fantastic. Thank you both so much for being here. I'm excited to hear what you have to say about this topic. I know you're going to give us some great insight here. All right, so let's jump in and talk about understanding the admissions process. What does it entail?
Doctor, go get him.
All right, no problem. So first off, you have your standardized testing. Since the height of the pandemic, pretty much every place has gone test optional. Some places have totally done away with their review. So if you're applying to any of the institutions in the University of California system, for example, they're no longer considering standardized testing. But all that to say, many places have gone test optional. So the question we inevitably get is, does that really mean test optional? And we say, yes. And then the next question is, but does it really? We say, yes. So, but here's the thing I would say. In the absence of testing, everything else becomes a little bit more pronounced. So The quick advice I'd give is if you have a really, really high test score on the SAT or ACT, colleges do not have a preference. Send that everywhere. If you have an SAT or ACT score that's perhaps not as high as you would hope, you probably don't want to send that anywhere. But most of us are in the middle. So the advice I give students is if your test score would traditionally make you competitive, I would say submit it. So we individualize that with each and every student with whom we work. We also look at academic transcripts. You cannot compare your school community or your transcript to any other high school. They look at you within the context of where you have attended secondary education. And we know there's different ways of GPA is calculated. Some places give exact ranks, some don't. There's all sorts of different trends, but we try to figure out where you were and what you did with that. We talk a lot about extracurricular activities. There's a lot of I call it myths in the admissions ether. They're not looking for preferred activities. So we have some students who are like a 3-sport athlete. Awesome. We have students who do tons of community service. Awesome. We have students who do no community service, or they never set foot in the art studio because they're always in the science lab, or vice versa. They want to see commitment. That has many forms. So there's no preferred activities. And lastly, we want to know what students are going to do with the next step. So if we invite you to our college campus, whether that's Tufts or Vanderbilt or any other place for that matter, what will you do with that education? How will you take advantage of what we have to offer? So this is when we'll talk about this later, but the why us essays are very important. They're saying to you, of all the universities in the land, what led you to apply to Tufts University? And we're going to give you some strategies on how to answer that.
Nailed it.
There you go.
I agree.
All
Completely. I agree completely.
All right.
All right. And then, the understanding the admissions process, like I said from the jump, that's what we're doing constantly, right? And the process evolves. So we want to make sure that you have a good understanding of the things that are most vital in the process, and the things that colleges are going to, maybe scrutinize most closely. And the first of which is the personal statement or your essay, right? And there'll be a bunch of these, and I oftentimes separate them into 2 different camps. Your personal statement, which is the kind of why me, and then a bunch of essays for the colleges that are saying why them. But all colleges are going to want to know what's compelling about you as an applicant, right? And why are you compelled to apply to their college? What turns you on academically? What type of impact have you made in your community, and would you like to make in your future communities? Those are things that you're going to say through your essay. And your grades, even if they're excellent, they can't tell that story. If you're testing, even if it's excellent, they can't tell that story. So you're going to tell your story. So really take the personal statement and the essay, both as a requirement, but as an opportunity to tell them why you. And that's something that I really want our students to understand is, like Doctor said earlier, this is admissions, right? And often we get sidetracked by the fact that the admission may not happen, but that's what we're working towards, right? Next are interviews, and if you're so fortunate, right, to have the opportunity to tell the world who you are, and that college offers that opportunity. The interview, what I really like about interviews, right? They're either in person or they're via Zoom, but they're a personal conversation. And so much of what we cover in the college application evaluation process are things that happened, I guess, depending on when you started high school, when you were 13 or 14 or 15, right? They happened a few years ago. Your interview gives you the opportunity to tell the world who you are now, right? And to give some context into the decisions you've made, to the triumphs that you had, if you've had setbacks. It gives you the opportunity in a real-time situation to talk about yourself. And you'll learn as you move forward in life, talking about yourself is a luxury. You don't have to talk about yourself all the time. Interviews are a great opportunity to do that, right? As we move forward in the process, financial aid, scholarships, and I'll start with a really obvious reality. College is super expensive, right? Whether it be public, private, whether you're rich, poor, or otherwise, the expense of college is something that it's significant enough for you to give some thought to. right? So there's going to be a lot of guidance you'll need to navigate financial aid and scholarships. You'll need to know the difference between need-based financial aid, merit aid, the ways in which you apply for financial aid, which are, I wouldn't say equally tedious, but equally important as your college application. And there are a few different ways in which you apply for financial aid and scholarships. And that guidance is super important to have. And then admissions decisions come out. And what we try to do at Quad is make sure that you're juggling lots of positive admissions decisions, right? But what colleges are doing is they're making decisions on your candidacy based on the things that we just talked about, your personal statement and essay, the interview if you have one, the things that the doctor talked about in the previous slide, your academics, your path academically and otherwise. They're making decisions. And again, they're trying to make admissions decisions. So think about yourself being, admitted to a place more so than worrying about being denied admissions, right? Because that's really what all admissions people want to do. They want to select students who are going to be a great match for their student. And even if they don't decide to admit that student, they're pretty sure, and I'm sure that student's going to get good decisions at other places.
Awesome. Thanks for walking us through that. So next section of this, we're going to go and talk about what exactly admissions counselors are looking for and colleges are looking for in students' applications. But hoping one of or both of you can quickly just cover what, for college counselors, what the admissions process looks like, how many people are reading applications, what is like the standard journey of your application once it's submitted look like?
I mean, I'll give you sort of the crash course. It depends a little bit in every office. So if you're asking how do the colleges do blank, it could be many factors. So there's probably a lot of overlap in the way that we evaluate applications at Vanderbilt as they did at Tufts. And so there's a lot of similarities, but there can be some slight differences. All of that to say, what they're really looking for is that you've got strong academics. So that's one thing that I think I want to state that it seems somewhat obvious, but I had a student recently I was working with. He was obsessed about the essay and just totally obsessed. And I said, okay, what percentage of the evaluation do you think is the essay? And he said a significant part. I said, well, how much would you say? Out of 100%, what would you say? He said 30%. And I said, well, it's something that they evaluate, but it's not necessarily the one all be all. So you could write, say, the greatest essay in the history of college essays, and you still have to have your academic house in order. So a good way to look at it is and I stole this actually from a colleague who used to work at Union, Kelly Harrington, if you know him, Darryl.
I worked with him at Union.
Oh, yeah, you did. Yeah. So he said, so he used to say, a good essay can cure the sick. It cannot raise the dead. So we're going to talk about kind of what that looks like. But all that to say, you're in high school, you're applying for more school. So school is going to be first and foremost. Now, sometimes students and parents will say, so it's all about the numbers. And you say, no, it's not all about the numbers, but the numbers are important. So this is one thing that we are going to explain as we look at each and every application. But generally speaking, when the application comes in, the officer assigned that geographic territory would first read that application. And then after that, they would send it to, at least in the offices I worked at, was basically called sign off. So this student is amazing and just got the Nobel Peace Prize. That did not happen, students. Don't worry, I'm just giving the example. Probably going to take that one. So it goes sign off, admit. Goes to another officer who's usually high up in the office. And sometimes they write, Dr. Nick is wonderful and right as always. And sometimes they go, no, we got to talk about this. Same thing with sign off, deny. You go, nice student, really worked hard, great story, but they're just a little bit too low for us academically. Goes to the higher up. Sometimes they say, you're right. And then the file's decided. Other times they'll say it has to fall committee. But you also have a lot of students who will fall in that muddy middle. And that's exactly what we discussed. So all of these decisions are being coded, but they're not finalized till you hit the button that sends the email out. You have a decision. So they're kind of coded as you go through the winter, but they're not necessarily official until the email goes out saying that you can check your decision.
Great. And then you used the word committee. I think I'm sure that will come up
a
few times during this. Can you just briefly talk about what committee is?
Yeah, so this is done a little bit differently in every office, but Liberal arts colleges will typically, have more of the staff kind of voting on it, whereas the committees that I was a part of, usually it would be me as a territory officer presenting my students to usually 3 other officers. And I always said it was a little bit like auditioning on American Idol. You're trying to get like the 3 yeses. So I would turn and I'd say, okay, Darryl, where are you at? I like him. I'm leaning admit, but I'm kind of waitlisty. Okay, well, how about you? I don't understand what's going on here at all. I don't know what you guys were thinking. This kid's awesome. What are you talking about? So committee can certainly get intense. It's never personal. But I'll say it's definitely every student's given full and fair consideration. And I often have told parents, I wish you could see how thoughtful committee is run and how many different things are brought up and different life experience that admissions officers may have and been able to lend a lens to explain where that student was coming from.
I think that was brilliantly described. I worked at both smaller colleges where we did full round the table committee and in bigger offices where we did a more regional approach. And you described that very, very clearly.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Thank you for walking us through that. I think that will put the rest of this webinar into context. All right. So what are admissions committees looking for? So we talked about what they're looking at. So let's go through and talk about what they're looking for in each of your components.
Like the doctor said before, you're going from high school, right, to higher learning. So your academic journey prior to arriving to college is super important in helping them ascertain your academic potential, right? Colleges want to know how well you're matched to their sort of academic, ethos and your ability and likelihood of succeeding, right? So they're going to look to see your potential, and they're going to really look to see your grades, but not just your grades. They're going to look at your academic journey. Have you had an upward trajectory? Have you had a steady, strong performance throughout high school? They're going to look to see what your academic record says about your potential to come to their school and excel as a scholar, right? And the evaluation, and I often say there's 2 different ways that a college might look at your application. The holistic evaluation is really what you want to happen in your process. That's a committee type of evaluation where the wholeness of your application is considered. There's a data evaluation that, as you'd imagine, takes place in looking at your grades and your numbers and your test scores and your rank in class, if that's something that's part of your nomenclature. But most colleges are trying to get an understanding of your academic potential, right? That's part of your profile. But also the holistic evaluation tells them about the type of person you are, the type of citizen you'll be when you come to campus, the type of impact you'll make in the classroom, in the residence halls, and throughout campus. And often the committee that we talked about in the previous slide, that is where the holistic evaluation is taking place. They're taking what people say about you in recommendations, what you're saying about yourself in your own essays, and then putting together a narrative to say, does the wholeness of who this scholar and person is match the type of student and person and citizen we're trying to bring to our campus? And that process, as Nick said before, super, super thoughtful. And it doesn't take a day and it doesn't take weeks. It takes a couple months because they're making sort of high impact decisions on people who've committed a lot of their effort into applying to those colleges. So that holistic evaluation is something that in admissions is something you can count on happening at most schools that are doing thoughtful admissions. But again, they're looking for your potential to come there and excel. And then the holistic evaluation talks about your potential to come there and thrive as a citizen.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, a phone call that I got in the spring sometimes was from a parent or student, why was I waitlisted? Why wasn't I offered admission? And, what did we do wrong is often what they sometimes come right out and say that. But other times they're strongly insinuate. And the answer almost always is nothing. We have way more students applying than we have space for. And you have to make some hard decisions. So there have certainly been applications that I really liked the student. I thought they could do well. I thought they would be successful, but we just don't have room for them all. And that's why you see so many folks like myself and Darryl who worked in highly selective admissions come to, as we say in the profession, other side of the desk to help nervous students. Because I was a ball of nerves when I was applying. And I realized, like, as an educator, I could do so much more good, explain what this process is and what it's not.
Fantastic. All right.
Yeah, so this is a big one, and this is a huge takeaway. I hope you all pay attention to this. When a college asks you, they'll phrase it in some lofty sort of language, like, at our university, it's a marketplace of ideas and the exchanging of intellectual knowledge, and we hope to learn what you're about. They're basically saying, why are you applying here? Why specifically are you applying here? So I'm 2 miles down the road from Rice University. I have a wonderful friend who's worked in Rice admissions, Houston born and raised, and Rice's mascot's the owl. She has owl jewelry, everything. It's kind of amazing. I don't think I've ever seen the same piece twice. But they asked, why Rice? Why are you applying here? And she said, it's the easiest question we ask, and they always get it wrong. Why, out of all the universities, are you applying here? So I'll give you a great example. This happens a lot with New York City institutions. If you're applying to NYU, Columbia, Barnard, Pace, Hofstra, Adelphi, Fordham, just to name a few, all of those places are in the New York City area, if not the city proper. And so what's going to happen, though, is you have a lot of students who will write, wow, there's so much to do in New York City, and if I go to that institution, I can avail myself of that. Well, you think they don't know that? NYU's admissions office is on like the 30th floor right near Washington Park, right? So they're going to look right. They're looking outside. They're around skyscrapers. So you think, I never noticed this. Look at all this stuff to do. What specifically do you want to do? Another example I use all the time. Pretty much everyone's got study abroad. Wake Forest has a house on the Venetian Canal in Italy. So instead of saying, I want to go to Wake Forest because I can study abroad, you say, when I'm really into art history or culture or what have you, or the Italian language, and I noticed that you have this house on the Venetian Canal. That's really cool. That's why I want to go there. Way better answer. So show them that you know them. If you replace Rice with Tufts and it reads the exact same way, aside from maybe Boston versus Houston, right? I know it's in Medford, but Boston versus Houston, it's not good enough. It's not specific to them. My dean at Penn used to always say, does this person want to apply here because of what we have to offer, or are they applying because it's Penn? Mm-hmm. So you don't want to be the second category. They also want to see, a lot of different diversity and inclusivity. This can be any number of things. So we used to always, it was kind of like an unspoken thing. I think it's true in many offices. We want one student from one way of life to sit next to a student from a totally different way of life and find each other weird and learn from each other and go, I'd never heard of that, or I didn't know that was a thing. So that's what they're kind of going for. We are who we are. We bring our own background and experience. But yeah, they definitely want to hear, what about you kind of makes you yourself. And that's often really hard for many of us, especially, teenage students, to talk about themselves, but they're just trying to get an idea. Deans of admission love curiosity. They're less fond of certainty. So you can say, hey, this is what I believe about this topic, but I'm open to other ideas as well. That's a really good way to approach it.
Wonderfully said. And I think in so much as students and families that embark upon this process, and you're looking for schools that are a good match for what you're looking for, that's exactly what the colleges are looking for. They're looking for which students are a good match for the kind of institution they are and are evolving into.
Mm-hmm.
Great. All right, let's talk a little bit about some common misconceptions that people have.
All right. Common misconceptions. Well, and this is one I think we all probably have heard or might have misconceived ourselves, that it's all about the grades. Well, and we understand the academics are crucial. They're important. But the admissions process is holistic, right? So keep that in mind. And then also keep in mind, if you know that you're a really bright student, if you know that you've got the potential to do well, and you think that your grades may not fully or most accurately, document or highlight the kind of student that you are, you don't want to fall into this it's all about grades and test scores and numbers category. You're going to take the fact that that is important and then realize there are other ways in your application that you can shine. And colleges, especially the most selective ones, and this is something that I learned the hard way, especially the most selective ones, If it was all about the grades and test scores, we'd never get to the end of committee because 90% of our students in the applicant pool have the grades and test scores that would make them admissible. So
Right.
it is totally not all about that. It's all about your grades and test scores or your academic prowess, help the college ascertain if you're a good academic match. But students have done their research, so most students are going to be a good academic match. So understand that holistic approach should and hopefully will fortunately be part of your fate at the places where you apply, right? And this is something that the second point, only Ivy League schools matter, and I battle this a lot because I used to work at a super good school. I'm sorry, an excellent school that wasn't in the Ivy League, right? I'm often told by parents and students, and this is a conversation I love having. Hey, Mr. Tiggle, I want to go to an Ivy League school. They go, oh, you want to go to a good school? They go, no, I want to go to an Ivy League school. I go, I think what you mean is you want to go to a good school. They go, Mr. Tiggle, no, I want to go to an Ivy League school. They go, well, look, a couple quick points. There's only 8 total, right? They're super different from each other. And I mean, they couldn't be more different, right? Mm-hmm. But I think you know them, right? And so that makes it matter, right? But there's a lot of schools that don't exist in that athletic conference that are super good and that super matter, okay? And oftentimes I'll speak with parents and they say, like, oh my, Mr. Tiggle, look, only the Ivy League kids are getting the best jobs. And I go, look, this isn't even a math, but this is an arithmetic thing. Only about 1,500 kids are graduating from those 8 Ivy League schools, and there's way more than 15,000 super good jobs available every year. And I mean, way more, right? So if they're relying upon the Ivy League to fill the super good ones, we're going to be short a lot of people power, right? So my journey and our journey in this process is helping you understand the depth and breadth of the goodness of schools. And Ivy League schools are good. I've got a spouse upstairs who went to one of these places. I did not, and I can often hold a conversation with them and sometimes women, right? So I want my families and students to understand that while the Ivy League schools represent a sort of a hallmark of schools that are excellent, the goodness of schools and the ones out there that matter, they abound, right? And as we think about the match, right, unless you're a super good match for one of those just 8, of which Stanford, Duke, Georgetown, Tufts, Vanderbilt are not part of that group, right? There's a bunch of other schools out there that matter.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Darryl said many of the things that I was thinking myself. There's 8 schools in the Northeast. The Ivy League is an athletic league. It's not a measure of quality. People do not know what this means. They think it says, as Darryl said, MIT, not an Ivy. Caltech, not an Ivy. Stanford, not an Ivy. Northwestern, Chicago, not an Ivy. Emory, Vanderbilt, Duke, not an Ivy. So this obsession with the Ivy is weird. But a student who is happy at Columbia may not be happy at a Dartmouth or a Brown. Oh. And so this is the thing, and I'll never forget. Two quick stories here. I once asked my caseload at one of the high schools I worked at, pretty elite high school. We had 11 admits out of a class of 140 to Yale alone. That's just one, just to give you an idea. I said, so they all want to go to an Ivy, and the parents are all saying this and stuff, but not really understanding what that means. And I said, okay, how many schools are in the Ivy League? What does it mean if a school's an Ivy? Name them. So I also said, name all. They couldn't do it. We had one kid get it right. And these are brilliant students, So my class of 33 students in my caseload. So this is something that's very much in the ether. And I can tell you, whether they're domestic students here in the United States or international, they're kind of famous for being famous. You can get a great education at any of them. Harvard was the first school in the United States, so everybody knew about it. But I would say there's over 4,000 roughly 4-year institutions in the United States alone. There's plenty of places you can get a great education. So no one's going to hand you an amazing job just because you went to an Ivy. It depends on what you did with it. So that's why you always hear counselors talk about fit. Is it a good fit? But when I see a family where they've got 8 colleges or a bunch, I'm looking at them saying, you're not doing a thorough college search. And also they can detect that. Because again, think about my dean at Penn. Do they want to come here because of what they have to offer? or are they coming here because it's Penn? I'll never forget a student who was at the same high school. She called me up at the end of the summer. We were like setting up our time and everything. And she said, Dr. A, I went up north and I visited all 8 of them. And as soon as she said that, I went, so even by your own cray-cray logic, you're in Cambridge in Massachusetts, right? Boston. You didn't go look at Tufts. You didn't go look at MIT. You didn't go look at BU in Northeastern. Like it's just like this is not the way to do it. It's been proven time and time again. It matters not where you are or where you go. It matters what you do with it. Because right now, there is someone in society who graduated dead last in Harvard's class of 2023. Yeah, that person exists. They're still probably pretty good, but nonetheless, like you want to find the good fit. And this also applies to grad school programs too. When I did MBA admissions, we didn't care necessarily what student majored in, if it was business or not, or where they went. We cared about what they did with it. And this is a hard thing for families who are bombarded by news stories. This student got into all 8, which again, it just showed actually a really poor college list, or what the magazine said. The magazine ranked stuff to sell magazines, and you know which ones I'm talking about. So all that to say, run your own race. And one thing that we work with at Quad is that we can help you find the list that makes a lot of sense with your aspirations.
I know.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you both for walking through that. And I think especially with the schools, and then when I was applying to schools, I ended up going to a school that I had never heard of before I started the process. And it was a perfect fit. So there's a million schools out there that are all have good qualities to them and where you can thrive. And our counselors are great at helping you find those. What are some other misconceptions?
Yes. Well, I think the perfect application guarantees admissions. I think again we lean into good old fashioned math there, where the admit rate is less than not 10%. When the admit rate is less than 30%, 20%, right? If the applicant pool is 50,000 students, there are definitely 30,000 perfect applications in there, but there's not going to be 30,000 admits, right? The application is the vehicle for them to get to know you and to evaluate you, right? But the application, no matter how many perfect ones there are, even before they start reading them, they kind of know how many they can take, right? So you want to be educated about the things they're looking for in an application, what resonates, what things they value most, but know that you're going to have a strategy, like Hallie and the doctor said, that we're going to give you a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, that even if your absolutely perfect application with fire essays and great rigor of curriculum and outstanding test scores doesn't move one committee, it might move another, right? So the perfect application gives you a really good opportunity to make sure your candidacy is given some evaluation. But when you think about the schools that admit I'll go the other way, 8 or 7 or 6%, perfect applications won't deliver that sort of end goal of admission. It's still a high bar. So you have to also count on some grace and some cosmos and some goodwill, right, in this process. But again, we're going to help you write perfect applications, right? And I think the other, I think this is the misconception that I might even understand where it comes from. Like, you've got all these applications, you've got thousands and thousands of them, and you're taking very few of them. There's got to be a formula to help you to understand it. But the formula is the painstaking process that the doctor described earlier. They have regional committees. They have committees around the table. They have, right, doctor? Not a formula. Yeah. Not a formula.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and this is such a perfect conversation to have tonight, because prior to this presentation, I was working with my main essay editor, and these concepts kind of came up. So he's a devoted Star Trek fan. So as any good Trekkie, he often quotes the Gospel of the Trek. And I guess this is from one of the movies, where it is possible to do everything right and still not succeed. And that kind of happens. So when you have these really bright students, sometimes, they might get different results from these ultra selective places. So I had a student I was working with last year at Quad. Get ready for this. Got into Columbia, Brown, Dartmouth, MIT, and was waitlisted to Harvard. So she has 3 Ivies, and MIT is not an Ivy, but nonetheless, still a pretty good place. And it was boo-hoo-hoo, I'm waitlisted to Harvard. And I'm like, you got it. You're a winner. You're a winner. So, all that to say, they also don't have a formula. So I think a lot of times with students and families I'm working with, they're like, well, if I do this and do this and do this and do this, like it's some sort of like combination lock or cheat code. So we had a student we were working with tonight. He wanted to apply to Carnegie Mellon, very, research-based institution in Pittsburgh. And he wrote this really wacky kind of answer that was totally not addressing the question, which was basically, why do you want to come to Carnegie Mellon? As we were discussing. So he was like, well, I want to stand out. Well, no. And I said, you stand out by being able to answer that question explicitly. Because we get lots of, it's a great place. It's got world-renowned professors, the dedicated faculty. What does that mean? Do other places not have these things? So you want to show them that you know them.
Well, I love the story that you told, Doctor, because I've got a student, and I'll make this quick, who's now enjoying an undergraduate experience at Stanford University and was waitlisted, because I want to protect the innocent, at two universities of where they have super good football on Saturdays. Right? There's a few of them that you might suspect. They're at Stanford, and they got waitlisted at the University of and the University of blank, blank, blank. Couldn't believe it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they got to Stanford.
Yeah. I mean, I will say, like, honestly, like sometimes I'll hear parents or students say, like, it's all a crap, it's so random. Not really. I mean, most of the decisions that I get back from students, like, I'm very rarely wrong. And honestly, when I'm wrong, it's usually a positive one. They'll be like, yeah, I think I was going to get in, and I did. Great. Everyone's happy. We're not with your mom and dad having a how this happened meeting. But all that to say, like, a lot of times they're not all that surprising. So we can make a pretty educated guess.
Yeah, it's not fair, but it is just.
Yes.
Is what I say.
I like that. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Great.
So I'll tell you, like, I've been, this is a horrible thing to admit to, but I've been watching these YouTube videos of reaction videos of students opening, oh, hey, everyone, I'm so nervous. This one girl kept playing with her hair last night. It was driving me nuts. Okay,
I don't do that.
It's a little bit hard, right? But so she said, I applied to 26. I know that's a lot, but you probably shouldn't have done it, but I did it. So I'm like, okay, well, what's the message? But I know just no one gets in, so I apply everywhere. So this is why the places get more and more selective every year. So when I applied to Vanderbilt, I was high school class of 2000, which was so cool. Vanderbilt took roughly half. So it was like 48, 52%, something like that. Last year, Vanderbilt took about hovering around 7-8%. Why? The student body didn't change. It's the demand. The amount of applications went up. And what I think happens with these ultra-selective places is that they say, okay, well, no one got in anywhere. You hear that a lot. So I'm going to apply to even more schools. But that's not being really thoughtful about your college search. The college consultant or college counselor's dream is that you have a balanced list. You've got your reach schools where you got a chance perhaps, but it's going to be tough. Your target schools kind of wait list at worst. And again, we can help you parse those out. And also likely safety foundation. And of those, you should love every institution on your list. As I mentioned, there's about 4,000 four-year schools. Can you find 2 or 3 that would absolutely take you that you'd be happy at? And that's the thing. I also have students every year where, like, they end up somewhere, and I get, this is a nightmare. Oh my goodness, and that whole thing. You check in with them in October, they're happy. They're talking to their professor, because I'll tell you a secret. High school's terrible. That's why God invented college. So college is really fun. And so when they go there, they're like, yeah, this is great. And then after a week, this is the best place. And the parents will say that. That might be cold comfort now, but rest assured, there's lots of students who end up somewhere that was maybe not where they thought they'd end up, and they're happy as can be. Because again, college is kind of awesome.
Yes, it is.
So how many colleges would you recommend applying to? What's your ideal range?
So this kind of varies on the student. My big thing is as I'm looking at, because I'm having pretty good ideas of what's going to happen. I want you to have options and be happy. I don't care what that looks like. I have some students who go for service academies. I have one student who want to do culinary programs. We looked at culinary programs. Whatever it is, as long as you have options and you're happy, That's what I care about. So I've had some students where they can kind of like make that criteria, which is 3 or 4 schools. That's unusual, but that happens. I have some students who say, you don't understand, I have to have 36 schools. You don't want 36 schools. I think much more in 15 is getting a little bit up there because it's hard to do a thorough college search. If you're applying, again, like to all 8 Ivies, for example, those are vastly different institutions. There is some overlap, but again, a student who's happy at Columbia may not be happy at Dartmouth. And, you just got to like think about that. They're different. They're different personalities, just like our students are different personalities.
All right. So let's talk about the elements of your application that carry the most weight. We did cover this a little bit, so we'll move fairly quickly through this, also so we can make sure we have enough time for Q&A.
Sure. All right, I'll go first with academic transcripts. That's essentially that's a narrative of your academic history, where you're strong. It might show your weaknesses, and it should speak to your potential. But essentially, your academic transcript is telling this place how well matched you might be for them as a scholar, right? So it's a pretty important piece of information. But the other thing I say about it reads much more quickly than your essays, right? It's super important, but the read is relatively quick.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I've often said, this is my own kind of personal, opinion, but 80% of the reason you get in are grades, transcript, and test scores if you submit them within the context of the high school. Because again, you're applying for school and, you're going to do more school. Take any grade in your report card. So 9th grade, French, for example, you had a lot of hours. You had a lot of hours in class, a lot of assignment. Good days, not so good days, just like any other of your other courses. Whereas the essay is something that, yes, it tells about you, but that's a 1-page single-space document, as opposed to all the work you put into everything. So one of the things I used to love to do to my 9th grade students on the second day of high school, I'd say, how many of you by a show of hands have started your college application? They go, huh? You did yesterday. So as you go through high school, you've got your highest level of control over the application in 9th grade because you haven't written it, but probably your least amount of interest relative to what you'd be senior year. And as you go through high school, those 2 variables switch. So it looks like an X. So that's what we try to do is like, you don't want to sit down with a 9th grader and say, let's come up with your 4-year plan to get into Yale. Like that's not really going to work out that way because Yale can change and they can change, or any school for that matter. But what we want to do is once we get into the junior year, that's when we start talking about specific schools and what have you.
Just quickly, still those test scores, I'd say every generation, they benefit for something that the previous generation did not, or future generations may not. Standardized test scores, still important in college admissions if you submit them, right? So I've been telling my students, give it a shot if you like, and then use your test score strategically based on the data produced by the schools where you might apply. And if your test scores will be a sword that will, wield some power for you, we'll use them. And if not, we will take the option to not submit. Okay? And there's a couple exceptions where you'll have to submit your test scores to certain schools in certain places and or for certain programs.
Yeah, absolutely. And then with letters of recommendation, this is less like a report home to your parents, like, oh, I really like this student, but today he fell asleep in class. Like, they're not doing that. We used to say in high school, we write about you on your best day. And some students have more of those than others, but nonetheless, on your best day. So really, I've read quite literally over 21,000 letters of recommendation and written hundreds myself. I can count on one hand how many were negative, maybe like 3 fingers, actually. So it's a good thing. But all that say, they're curious to see what you're about in the class. And I work very close with my faculty on that as well. So, all right. So we talked about the personal statement and essay in a lot of detail. So again, one thing that you might do, and I use this with students all the time, even if you're not applying to these institutions, Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, and also Connecticut College in, Connecticut, if you just put into Google essays that worked along with that institution, they will give you real life essays from students who are admitted and have enrolled. And it just gives you an idea, because it's probably the first time it's almost certainly the first time you've written anything like this. You know, kind of like, what are they looking for? They give you examples. Some are funny, some are sad, some are inspirational, like whatever the case may be. But that kind of gives you an idea as to what they're going for. Even though you may not be applying to either or both of those institutions, it's good general advice to just have to get a sense for it. And it's totally free. You just can Google it. They've been doing it for years. So that's great. With extracurricular activities, as we talked about, it's not about what you do, it's how you show that commitment. And students oftentimes forget things like, perhaps you take care of your younger siblings, or, you know, a grandparent, or maybe you have a part-time job, or you do stuff with your, you know, house of worship, or you have a summer job, or you have a part-time job, or you have a YouTube channel. I mean, I've had that too, or, you know, anything like that. All that stuff can count, you know, so it's not one particular thing. And it's not nearly as scrutinized as people think. Like I'll tell you, this year, for whatever reason, all of my seniors are just freaking out about the order of the activities, because it says on the Common App, you know, yeah, it's funny, Darryl's reacting to this too. Like it says order of importance, and they're like, well, should I put soccer as number 5 or number 4? And it's not like we're in committee. I'm like, Darryl, like, I don't know. They put it as number 4. I think it's more of a 5. You can't have them. Like, they're not thinking like that.
Yeah.
It's not nearly as nitpicky as people think. And I know that might seem like hard to believe, but they're not freaking out about that. I would find a little odd if it was like, you know, in junior year, I was elected to serve as class president for senior year, and that's like towards the bottom. Like, that's kind of a bigger thing. Aside from that, it's not that big of a deal. You know, 4-year activities and 3-year activities towards the top and kind of all the way down. But that's one thing we also work with each student on.
And these 2 topics in particular, we do have a couple webinars that are up on our website. You can go and watch for free. That will walk you through these in depth. So feel free to go check those out. And then let's go through some strategies to stand out, and then we'll answer a couple questions.
All right. Okay, crafting a compelling personal statement or essay. Super important, right? Because again, most of the stuff that's in your application is historical data, right? Your personal statement is something that's written in closer to real time. And I like the tagline here. Authenticity is key in your personal statement. Often, and I totally understand this dilemma. Students say, "Oh my God, I don't have anything special enough, or unique enough, or tragic enough, or triumphant enough to write about." Authenticity is the very most important thing. Think about telling a story about yourself that you can tell well. And I've recently started saying about the personal statement, think about, if you are of my background and you've gone camping or been around a campfire before and have listened to a good story, the person telling that story knows the facts. They're not making it up. They tend to not be coming up with words that they haven't used before, and they want to make sure that everyone else around that campfire leaves knowing exactly what they were talking about. Use your personal statement that way. You know yourself so well. You are awesome, right? And people need to understand it. And you can tell the world how awesome you are way better than anybody else if you use the language that you're already familiar with and telling brilliant stories, right? So think about crafting your personal statement as one telling a story about yourself, right? And essentially telling the colleges why you. This is why you should admit Darryl Tiggle, right? My background is so interesting, right? My journey is so interesting. My contribution is so interesting. Think about it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say, like, when I was in recruiting my admissions territory, I said, when it gets to your essay, I almost envision you sitting across from my desk and I go, okay, so what are you all about? And then Darryl would say, all right, this one time. And you hear this a lot from counselors, but show, don't tell. Don't say, I really care about helping kids. Say, every day after school, I volunteer at the local library to help first graders learn how to read. That's a way better one. The other thing, too, is like, you want to talk to grandma. It's formal but familiar. So you wouldn't be like, hey, grandma, I really want to go to school, but it's a little sus, LOL. Like, you don't want to do that. They're not going to understand. But you also don't want to use too much sugar, as I say. So there's an essay I read earlier today, as a matter of fact, and he's like, as the courageous anticipation coursed through my veins. tone it down a little bit. When I study computer science there, I'm going to learn the honor, glory, and scholarship of the STEAM program. Oh my God, dude, like calm down. Like tell us why you want to go. It's just kind of down to earth. And that's why I always recommend looking at these examples, because this kind of gives you an idea. Here's what they're looking for. Again, as I've said, I've had essays that made me laugh. I had essays that made me cry. I had essays that made me go, oh my goodness, I can't believe that happened to you. I had somewhere I go, I can't believe you're writing about this. Like, just use your imagination. Probably had an essay on that topic. So all that to say, like, it doesn't have to be wacky and have the admissions committee bawling their eyes out or standing up and clapping. They want a story about you. And that sounds really simple, but it can be done. Real quick example, had a student, she was working at an Italian restaurant as her summer job. And for any of those of you who have ever been a waiter, you got to balance that tray, and Italian food's a little bit heavy. Mm-hmm. She dumped the entire plate of food on her first table and was mortified. And I love that because it's failure, which a lot of students will shy away from, but it also, you learn so much, and everyone can relate to an experience like that. Very simple, was a hit essay with committee too.
All right. So let's go over this slide quickly so we have time to answer a question or two.
All right. Maximizing the letters of maximizing the impact of your letter of recommendation. To enhance your letters of recommendation, if you're a freshman, sophomore, junior, start doing this already. If you're a senior, re-engage, right? Those you would like to write for you. Build strong relationships with them, right? Make sure you're engaging them. Your conversation asking them to write your recommendation should not be the last conversation you have with that writer, right? You want them to be able, if someone stops them on the street and says, hey, tell me about Dr. Nick, you might say, oh, the guy who went to Vanderbilt and now he does quad ed. And you want them to be able to naturally give a narrative about you. And they only do that if they know you, right? So that engagement is super important. And you may not be my style who comes and, raps with the teacher after class. Make sure to participate in class, right? Make sure that you're raising your hat, so the teacher has a personal observation of how you get down.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I'm telling my juniors right now, start talking to your teachers, not necessarily every day, but you don't want your first time you ask for a letter of recommendation, which I recommend students do that in the spring before the summer starts. So that gives the teacher tons of time to be like, hey, I'm applying early and it's due November 1. I know it's Halloween. Mm-hmm. Now you're making them live a real life horror story. So you don't want that. So you want to give them plenty of time on the front end and let them get to know you as well.
I know we had a question in the Q&A that came up that someone asked if it has to be an 11th grade teacher, if you can ask a 10th or 9th grade teacher for a letter of recommendation. Do you have a quick answer for that?
Yeah, so real quick, typically it's junior year teachers because it's a full year of academic instruction, and that's kind of what you're indicative of. And most students do that. Now there's some caveats, like if they're teaching you 10th and 12th, or they're teaching you 12th, but they've been your homeroom advisor and or like a coach, because faculty wear many hats is fine. I will have students every year who dig in their heels and they say, no, you don't understand. My 9th grade, 8th grade, 7th, 6th, 5th grade teacher is like my second mom. I don't want to hear from your second mom from 5th grade. I want to hear from your 11th grade teacher. So all that to say, like, that's for the one that really is going to carry the most weight.
All right. Addressing weaknesses or gaps in your application.
All right. Well, this is one of those things where I say, look, you've got the opportunity, if there's something that stands out in your application that's aberrant, right? If you've always been an A student and there's a year that you were a C student, right? You might want to call that out, right? If you had a year where you had a bunch of absences, if you had a situation where your citizenship, right, might have been compromised in some way, don't let the admissions committee guess about that. They give you the opportunity to explain significant, impacts in your academic or personal journey. So make sure you know that there's something that would cause pause to your otherwise great candidacy, that you give them some context to understand that. One bad C when you're always a B student, you don't want to necessarily say, hey, I don't know if you guys saw, I got a C junior year, right? So it's not the sort of little bumps in the road, but the larger speed bumps, all right? Or changes in your performance or just output as a citizen, make sure you address those, because it might appear in other parts of your application, or it might say, hey, how they go from a D student to an A student, or how they go from an A student to a C student. Give some narrative of any seismic shifts, both positive or negative in your application.
And our counselors can help you with that as well, and kind of figuring out the right time to do that and how to do it.
See us first as you address those.
Yes.
All right, Q&A. I know we got a couple questions answered here throughout this, but we have a time for one or two. And if we don't get to your question, please schedule a free consultation with us, follow up with us via email, and we can answer those for you as well. But one that I know that I have heard a lot, especially with this topic, is how with admissions decisions, if you're an Ivy League school, 90% of your applicants fit, the mold, grade-wise, test-wise. How do you decide who to cut from that, to cut that 50,000 down to 1,000?
The way that I like to think about it is and doctor, tell me if you agree, they're not necessarily cutting out the 47,000 applicants that they're not going to admit. They're building in the 25 to 3,000 applicants that they are going to admit. And there's nothing wrong with those 47,000 that they decided not to take. And when I was at Tufts, I had to get used to, we'd be walking past 20,000 students, right, who weren't getting into our school. And I had to understand that in highly selective admissions, it's not about meritocracy or fairness. That's a ship that you all have to put on a speed ship out to the middle of the ocean. Fairness, meritocracy, it doesn't fit into that rubric. But what they're doing is putting together intentional communities that reflect the kind of place they want to be. And if you're not admitted to that place, it is not an indictment on your scholarship or your person. It is just a lack of number of places in that community that they're trying to build. Right? And I know that's a convoluted answer, but they're not kicking thousands of people out. They're inviting a few very fortunate people in.
Yeah, and I would say, just to kind of put a point on that. So I think sometimes people don't realize how selective it is, and at some of these like really elite single-digit mid places. So if you're watching your local news in the morning and the weatherman says there's a 95% chance of rain, you would carry your umbrella and be a little surprised if it didn't rain. But when we say there's a 95% chance that you will not be, it's not even a chance, but 95% of the applicants will not be admitted, people are just stunned, right? Yeah. It's not to say that other 95% were like kids with terrible grades, disciplinary infractions, and don't do any activities. It's hard. And again, that's why you see folks like Darryl and myself come on to the other side of the desk so we can help you tell them what your narrative is. Really quick example, I saw this from one of my colleagues. You've got the great grades, you got the great test score, you've got the great curriculum. That gets you a seat at the table. And then at the table, they say, and what do you have to say? That's when you can articulate why you want to go to that ultra-selected place. That's what helps you stand out. It's not doing something wacky. It's answering the question and showing the fit. That's what's most important.
All right. Well, thank you both so much. I know we covered a whole lot today. So again, if you have any questions, reach out to us. We also have additional webinars you can sign up for that are coming up soon on our site, and previous webinars you can watch back as well. Thank you so much for joining us. And Nick, Darryl, thank you both so much.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure to have you both. I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Yeah, absolutely. And call us up if we can help. So thank you so much.